Hey there, it's Susan Pierce Thompson, and welcome to the weekly vlog. I want to talk to you this week about something that might make sense as you look back over the holidays in hindsight. You know that old saying, hindsight is 20/20, which is fun to say, can I say, in 2020. But anyway, I digress. I got this coaching question during the holidays, and I've been mulling it over. It came up on a Bright Lifers coaching call from a woman named Dee Fay, who lives in Green Bay, Wisconsin. And she is relatively rare in the bright line eating community in that she was happy, thin, and free when she got here. She was happy and thin when she got here, not yet free. She actually started 12-step food recovery when she was 16 years old and got into a right-sized body and floated around, kind of playing a little bit at the margins here and there, just not feeling fully free. So in 2015, she started watching the vlog, kept watching for a couple years, and then kind of felt called to do the boot camp. And she describes this feeling of like watching her mouse hover, the cursor hover against over the register button. Like, am I really going to do this? Am I really going to spend money to do a bright line eating boot camp when I'm already in a right-sized body? Really? And she did it, and she got connected and she got free like she'd never been before. And recently I was coaching her on a Bright Lifers coaching call, and she said the following. She said, Susan, over the holidays, I'm watching myself be exposed to foods in my environment that I normally never get exposed to. Not really at all, or certainly not in this kind of quantity. The configurations of not my food and the smells, they're all around me, and I'm noticing suddenly my brain is playing on me, like the saboteur has woken up. And she said, I have a part of me that's kind of judging myself for this. Like, I've been doing this for so long. Am I ever gonna really get completely free? Why am I thinking about food all of a sudden again? And she said, is there something about being exposed to not my food that is creating these thoughts in me? She said, I haven't eaten any of it. I haven't eaten any of it. And I said, you know what, Dee? There is. I said, it's time that we talked about the science of food smells. Food smells. Smell, the olfactory system. Molecules in the air going into our nose, connecting to receptors, unlocking reactions that go straight to the brain, that trigger memories, that trigger neural pathways, that are as real as food hitting the tongue. As a matter of fact, in the constellation of smell and taste, smell is dominant. We taste food primarily because of smell. And in fact, research shows that when it comes to unlocking the addiction centers in the brain and the memory centers in the brain, memories that trigger cue response behavior patterns, smell is among the most powerful senses. So, food smells. This creates an issue, especially for those of us who bake still while not eating the food. Smells. Or who go out to eat and sit there while other people are eating not my food. Smells. Who sit and eat lunch with coworkers. Smells. Food smells are potentially problematic. And here's what I want to say about that. All drugs are dose dependent, meaning the bigger the dose, the bigger the effect, right? So although in bright line eating, we create bright lines that create tremendous psychological freedom, The bright line is a wall for us to gauge our behavior against. The reality is that these drugs are dose dependent. And here's an example where, the bright line is a little bit of a misnomer. So for example, balsamic vinegar, it's on the Bright Line Eating Food Plan. Is that straight fructose, devoid of any offsetting fiber like that might be present in a piece of fruit? Yeah. Do we get away with using it generally, by and large? Yeah. Why? Because drugs are dose dependent. So, in terms of navigating what to do about smells, I want you to think about a couple things. Your susceptibility score can serve as a roadmap. Like, how should you be handling these things? Well, the higher you are on the susceptibility scale, the more cautious it behooves you to be. Like, I'm ridiculously high on the susceptibility scale. I don't bake. I don't bake. I used to bake. As a matter of fact, being an amazing baker was a huge part of my identity. Huge. I don't bake. And the way I say it is, I have no business being up to my elbows in sugar and flour. I just don't. I could put Scotch tape over my mouth, it wouldn't matter. It would impact me. I know it would, right? I know it would. So I don't bake. I'm super high on the susceptibility scale. I also have a bright line eating identity that makes me want to be cautious, right, in general. So if you're lower on the susceptibility scale and you weigh the sort of risks and you decide that you want to partake of whatever occasion or baking or whatever, right, it's up to each person to decide where they're at for that particular situation. I also want to say that the landscape changes on a day-to-day basis, depending on our motives, depending on which part of us is more active in that moment. The food controller, the food indulger, or sort of a detached, calm, centered, highest self motivation, where we assess, you know what, I have a legitimate reason for being in this situation and my motive is pure. There is a certain protection that comes from that. In the same way that I often counsel people who need to take a medication, like for a colonoscopy, for example, that has sugar in it. I say, somehow, and there is no research that I'm aware of on exactly how this works, but somehow the brain knows when your motive is pure. When you take that for medicinal purposes with a pure motive, it doesn't trigger the addictive centers of the brain the way it would if you were taking it to get a hit. Another piece to the science of smell that came up for me as I was thinking about this really deeply over the last month has to do with a phenomenon that we see in certain people who, at some point on their journey, start to feel like their brain is fighting them. Like they're hungry all of a sudden where they weren't before, or their weight loss has stalled out even though they're still on the same food plan that they used to lose weight on. And what I realized is that because smell molecules lock into the olfactory system, go up to the brain, and trigger the same cascade that taste molecules do, smelling sexier foods can have the same impact as tasting sexier foods, which means they can trigger the resistance of the brain to the lowering of the adiposity set point. So I have an old vlog on the adiposity set point, and basically in a nutshell it goes like this. The brain, if you've hit a high weight, decides that it wants to defend that weight, and it unlocks a cascade of hormonal resistances to you getting thinner. And they include making you hungrier, slowing your metabolism, what else? More leptin resistance. It's not really a dopamine downregulation issue. It's more having to do with hormonal control. It's around your thyroid hormone, your leptin, etc. And with shifting all these hormones slightly, your brain tries to force you back up the scale. Of course, if you're weighing and measuring your food, you're trying to go down the scale and your brain starts to fight you. The signals to that would be that you're hungrier, and that you're not losing weight like you used to because your brain is lowering your basal metabolic rate essentially to fight you. So I say this because you can check your environment to see if you're noticing any of those symptoms. Maybe that's what's going on. So I say this because knowledge is power. And I also say this with the awareness that I'm not giving you hard and fast rules or an easy way out. The reality is that unfortunately, we live in a complicated, messy landscape when it comes to food. And being high on the susceptibility scale and doing bright line eating means being saddled with the need to navigate situations all the time. All the time. And knowledge is power. So if you didn't know that smells could be problematic, but you sometimes find yourself with your saboteur awake and alive and you didn't know why, well, now you have something else to check in your recent history, right? What have you recently been exposed to? And could that be having an impact? And sometimes something as simple as taking a couple days with simpler food, being really mindful about going back to basics, just writing down your most habitual, simple meals and giving yourself a couple days for your brain to settle down before you expose it again to something slightly more challenging or problematic can be all that it takes to settle back down from a slightly challenging experience that woke up that saboteur. So thank you, Dee, for bringing up the topic of could it be that these smells in my environment were triggering my brain in a way that I didn't expect? Because the truth is, yeah, I think that's exactly what was happening. And that's the weekly vlog. I'll see you next week.